My name is Marcus Webb, and I've been driving long haul for 17 years. That's important to remember. 17 years. I know every truck stop between Seattle and Chicago, every way station, every place where the cops like to hide with their radar guns. I know which rest areas have the good coffee and which ones you avoid after dark. I know the rhythm of the road like I know my own heartbeat. On February 9th, 2023, I was hauling refrigerated goods from Anchorage to Fairbanks, standard route. I'd driven it maybe 200 times before. The load was seafood, king crab mostly, packed in ice and worth about $80,000. My dispatcher, Janet, had been on my case all week about the delivery window. The client was some high-end distributor in Fairbanks, and they needed the shipment by 6 a.m. the next morning for a big event. No excuses, no delays. I'd started the drive around 2 p.m., which should have put me in Fairbanks by midnight, maybe 1 in the morning if I hit weather. And I did hit weather. About an hour north of Anchorage, the sky started dumping snow like I hadn't seen in years. Not unusual for Alaska in February, but this was heavy, real heavy. The kind of snow that turns your windshield into a wall of white, even with the wipers on full speed. I remember checking my watch at 3:47 p.m. when I passed mile marker 187 on the Parks Highway. The heater was blasting and I had the CB radio on, listening to other drivers complain about the conditions. There was a guy named Lonnie, drives for Swift, who was about 20 miles ahead of me. He was saying the snow was letting up near Denali, which was good news. I was hoping to push through without having to chain up. The truck handled well in snow. I was driving a 2019 Freightliner Cascadia, nothing fancy but reliable, and I'd put on fresh tires before leaving Anchorage. The weight of the load helped with traction. I wasn't worried yet. I'd driven through worse. Around 4:15 p.m., I passed the turnoff for Wasilla. The GPS showed clear sailing ahead, just a long stretch through the Matanuska Valley and then up into the mountains. Traffic was light. I saw maybe 3 other trucks in the first 2 hours, all heading south. Nobody going my direction except Lonnie somewhere up ahead. I kept the radio on for company. There's something about winter driving in Alaska that makes you want to hear other voices, even if they're just complaining about dispatch or talking about where to get the best breakfast. It reminds you that you're not completely alone out there. At 5:52 p.m., I passed mile marker 212. I remember because I logged it in my book. I was making good time despite the snow. The highway was straight here, cutting through flat terrain, and even though visibility was maybe 50 feet, I could follow the reflector posts on the shoulder. My headlights caught them every few seconds, little orange dots disappearing into the white. That's when I first heard the static. It came through the CB, sharp and sudden, cutting off Lonnie mid-sentence. He'd been talking about stopping at the Bear Paw truck stop for coffee. Then just static, loud enough to make me wince. I reached down and adjusted the squelch, but it didn't help. The static continued for maybe 10 seconds, then cut out completely. Dead silence. "Lonnie?" I said into the mic. "You there, buddy?" Nothing. I tried again. "Anyone on this channel? This is Polar Bear, northbound on the Parks at marker 212. Radio check." Silence. I switched channels, cycling through all 40, but got nothing except that same dead air. No static, no voices, nothing. Like the radio had just stopped working. But the power light was still on, and the squelch was set right. I tapped the mic a few times, heard my own taps come through the speaker, so I knew it was transmitting, but nobody was answering. I told myself it was the storm. Weather can do strange things to radio signals, especially in the mountains. I'm not a radio expert. I just drive. I kept going. What else was I going to do? The load had to get to Fairbanks, and the highway was still passable. The snow was bad, but I'd driven in worse. I dropped my speed to about 45 and kept my eyes on those reflector posts. At 5:20 p.m., I should have passed mile marker 230. I was watching for it because there's a rest area there, and I was thinking about pulling off to check my trailer connections. The cold can make the electrical connections brittle, and I wanted to make sure my refrigeration unit was still running at the right temperature. $80,000 worth of crab doesn't stay fresh if the freezer quits. But I didn't see marker 230. I saw marker 224.
I thought I'd misread it at first. The snow was thick and visibility was terrible, but I slowed down and looked again at the next marker, marker 223. I was going the right direction. The highway signs I could make out all said Fairbanks, northbound, but the mile markers were going backwards, or I'd somehow turned around without realizing it, which didn't make sense because there hadn't been any turnoffs, no intersections, nothing, just straight highway through the snow. I pulled over onto the shoulder and put the truck in park, left the engine running to keep the heat going. I sat there for a minute, trying to figure out what had happened. Maybe I'd gotten confused about which marker I'd passed. Maybe I'd seen 212 when it was actually 224, and now I was at 223, which would make sense. The snow could have obscured part of the number. I pulled out my logbook and checked my entries. I'd written down 187 at 3:47 p.m. and 212 at 5:52 p.m. That was an hour and 5 minutes to go 25 miles, which seemed slow, but the weather explained that. If I really had been at 212, then I should be somewhere around 240, maybe 235, if the snow had slowed me down more than I thought. But the marker outside said 223. I pulled my phone to check the GPS, but I had no signal. Not unusual out here. Cell coverage in rural Alaska is spotty at best. The truck's built-in GPS was still working, and it showed me right where I should be, northbound on the parks between Wasilla and Denali. The little blue dot was moving north on the screen, steady and normal.
But something felt off. I put the truck back in gear and pulled onto the highway. I watched the mile markers carefully now. Marker 222, then 221, then 220, all going backward, all confirming that I was heading south back toward Anchorage, even though every instinct I had said I was going north. The compass on my dashboard said north, the GPS said north, but the mile markers said south. I tried the CB again. "Anyone out there? This is Polar Bear and the Freightliner. You hearing me?" Static answered me this time. Just a brief crackle, then silence again. I drove for another 20 minutes, watching the markers count down. 215, 214, 213. The highway was still straight, still empty, no other vehicles in either direction. The snow kept falling, and the windshield wipers kept beating their rhythm, and I kept driving north toward markers that said I was going south. At 5:55 p.m., I passed mile marker 212 again. I know it was the same marker because it had a dent in it. I'd noticed the dent the first time, a crease right through the 2 that made it look like 2I2 if you glanced at it quickly. I remembered thinking someone must have clipped it with their mirror, and here it was again, the same dent, the same marker I'd passed more than an hour ago. I pulled over again. This time I got out of the truck. The cold hit me immediately, even through my heavy coat and insulated coveralls. The wind was worse than I'd expected, driving the snow horizontally across the highway. I could barely see 20 feet in any direction, but I could see the mile marker clearly enough, number 212 with a dent in the 2. I walked around to the back of the trailer and checked the refrigeration unit. It was running fine, temperature holding steady at -10 degrees. I checked the trailer connections, the electrical plug, the air lines. Everything was solid. The truck was fine. The trailer was fine. Everything was working exactly as it should. I climbed back into the cab and sat there with the engine idling, trying to think through what was happening. The logical explanation was that I'd somehow gotten turned around. Maybe I'd dozed off for a second. It happens, even to experienced drivers, and drifted into a turnaround or a median crossover without realizing it. But I didn't feel tired. I felt wide awake, and I would have noticed the truck turning around. You don't just reverse direction on a highway without feeling it. The GPS still showed me heading north. The compass still pointed north, but the mile markers were telling a different story. I decided to keep going. I had a delivery to make, and I was already behind schedule. If the markers were wrong, maybe they'd been installed backward during some maintenance project. Stranger things have happened with highway departments. Then I'd figure it out eventually. The GPS knew where I was going. I'd trust the GPS.
At 6:30 p.m., I passed mile marker 187, the same marker I'd passed at 3:47 p.m., almost 3 hours earlier. I'd driven for 3 hours and somehow ended up exactly where I'd started. That's when I started to feel the first real edge of worry. Not panic, not yet, but something cold settling into my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. I'd been driving professionally for 17 years. I'd handled mechanical failures, medical emergencies, black ice, brake failures, fires, and every kind of weather you can imagine. But I'd never had a situation where the road itself stopped making sense. I tried my phone again. Still no signal. I tried the CB. Still silent, except for occasional bursts of static that almost sounded like words, but never quite resolved into anything I could understand. The highway stretched ahead of me, white and empty, and exactly the same in every direction. Snow falling, reflector posts marking the shoulder, mile markers counting down or counting up, or doing whatever they were doing. And somewhere ahead, somewhere behind, the same stretch of highway I'd been driving for hours. I kept going north because that's what I knew how to do. You keep going, you finish the route, you make the delivery. That's the job. At 8 p.m., I passed a green highway sign that said Denali National Park, 78 miles. I'd seen that sign before, earlier in the drive, and it had said 78 miles then, too. I should have been closer by now. I should have been seeing a different number, but it was the same sign, the same distance, like I hadn't moved at all. The snow kept falling, the windshield wipers kept beating their rhythm, and I kept driving north toward markers that said I was going south. I didn't know it then, but that moment, passing that Denali sign for what I thought was the second time, that was when I should have stopped, should have pulled over, shut down the truck, and waited for help. But you don't do that when you have a load to deliver, and a dispatcher breathing down your neck, and 17 years of finishing every route you start. You keep going. That's what you do. That's what you've always done. So I kept going. By 8 p.m., I'd accepted that something was very wrong. Not just unusual, not just confusing, but fundamentally wrong in a way I didn't have words for. I'd passed mile marker 212 4 times. I was certain of that now. 4 times, each time with the same dent in the same place. I'd started marking them in my logbook, writing down the time each time I passed it. 4:52 p.m., 5:55 p.m., 7:03 p.m., and 8:04 p.m. The intervals weren't even consistent. The first time took an hour and 3 minutes, the second time 68 minutes, the third time 61 minutes, like the road was stretching and contracting, taking longer or shorter to loop back on itself, without any pattern I could figure out. I tried to stay calm. Panic doesn't help anything, especially not when you're alone in a truck in the middle of a snowstorm. I focused on the practical things. I had fuel, 3/4 of a tank, which should have been plenty to get me to Fairbanks with some to spare. I had food, a cooler with sandwiches and energy drinks, enough for a couple of days if I needed it. I had warm clothes. The truck was running fine. I wasn't in immediate danger, except I couldn't seem to leave. Around 8:30 p.m., I saw headlights behind me for the first time in hours. They appeared suddenly in my mirrors, cutting through the snow maybe 100 yards back. Another truck looked like. I felt a surge of relief. Another driver meant I wasn't alone, meant I could find out if they were experiencing the same thing, or if this was somehow just me, some kind of hallucination or medical episode. I grabbed the CB mic. "Hey, driver behind me, you copy? This is Polar Bear and the Freightliner. You're hearing me?" Static, but different this time. Not the dead silence or the empty crackle. This static had texture to it, almost like words buried underneath, like a bad connection that almost comes through, but not quite.
"If you can hear me, flash your lights," I said. The headlights behind me didn't change. They just stayed there, maintaining the same distance, maybe 100 yards. I slowed down to see if the truck would close the gap or pass me. It slowed too, matching my speed exactly. I sped up. The truck sped up. I tried the radio again. "Come on, buddy. I know you can hear me. Just key up your mic or something. Let me know you're there." The static shifted, and for just a second I thought I heard something. A voice. Maybe mine, maybe not. But then it was gone again, swallowed by the white noise. The truck behind me maintained its distance, never closer, never farther, just there, a constant presence in my mirrors. I passed mile marker 212 again at 9:07 p.m., fifth time, and the truck behind me passed it too, exactly when I did, like we were connected by an invisible tether. I wrote it down in my logbook. 9:07 p.m., marker 212, fifth time, truck following. The snow didn't let up. If anything, it was getting worse, the wind pushing drifts across the highway in waves. My truck plowed through them easily enough. I had the weight for it, but they made the road feel less real somehow, like I was driving through a simulation where the scenery was just repeating textures instead of an actual place. At 9:45 p.m., I passed the Denali National Park sign again. Still 78 miles, still the same green sign with the same brown border and the same distinctive shield logo. I knew every detail of it now. There was a small scratch on the bottom left corner, barely visible, but I'd memorized it during my previous passes. And there it was, exactly as I remembered. The truck behind me was still there. I decided to try something. At the next mile marker, 211, counting down like always, I suddenly pulled onto the shoulder and stopped. Just came to a complete stop, hazard lights on, sitting there in the dark with the snow swirling around me. The headlights behind me kept coming. They didn't slow down, didn't swerve, just kept approaching at the same steady speed. I watched in my mirror as they got closer. 50 yards, 40 yards, 30. And then they were gone. Not like they passed me, not like they turned off or pulled over. They just weren't there anymore. 1 second I could see them clearly, close enough to make out the shape of the truck, a big rig, bigger than mine, maybe an old Peterbilt or Kenworth, hard to tell in the snow. And the next second, there was just empty highway behind me, dark and white and utterly empty. I sat there for 5 minutes, watching the mirrors, waiting for the lights to reappear. They didn't. I got back on the road. At 10:18 p.m., I passed marker 212 again, sixth time. The dent was still there. Everything was still exactly the same. And when I checked my mirrors 5 minutes later, the headlights were back, maintaining their distance, following me through the storm like they'd never disappeared at all. I stopped trying to understand it. Understanding wasn't helping. Instead, I focused on the rhythm of driving, watch the road, check the mirrors, monitor the gauges, keep the truck between the lines. These were things I knew how to do. These were concrete, real, manageable. The mile markers might be lying, and the highway might be looping, and there might be a ghost truck behind me, but I could still drive. That was something. Around 11 p.m., my dispatcher tried to call. I say tried because the phone didn't ring. The screen just lit up with her name, Janet, and a call notification, but there was no sound. I answered it anyway. "Janet, can you hear me?" Nothing. Not static, not a bad connection, just silence, like I was talking to dead air. "Janet, I'm having some issues up here. I'm not sure where I am exactly. The GPS is acting weird and—" The call dropped. The screen went back to the no signal indicator. I tried calling her back. The phone said it was connecting, but nothing happened. No ringing, no voicemail, nothing. Just the word connecting on the screen, frozen there while the call timer stayed at 0000. I gave up and set the phone down. At 11:43 p.m., I passed a rest area. I almost missed it. I'd been staring at the highway for so long that everything had started to blur together, but I caught the blue sign in my headlights just in time to slow down. Rest area, 1 mile. I'd been looking for a rest area for hours. I needed to stop, needed to get out and walk around, needed to see if the world outside the truck was as strange as the world inside it seemed to be. And more than anything, I needed to see if there was anyone there. Another driver, a highway maintenance crew, anyone. The exit ramp came up on my right. I took it, feeling the truck lean slightly as I curved off the highway. The ramp was unplowed. Snow drifted across it in ridges, but my truck pushed through them easily enough. I had the weight for it. But they made the road feel less real somehow,
like I was driving through a simulation where the scenery was just repeating textures instead of an actual place. At the end of the ramp was a parking lot, empty except for one other vehicle parked under a light pole. A truck, big rig, old Peterbilt looked like, just sitting there with its lights off, engine presumably running because I could see exhaust coming from the stacks. I grabbed my flashlight and my radio, force of habit, even though the radio hadn't worked in hours, and climbed out of the cab. The cold hit me like a wall, had to be well below zero with the wind chill. I pulled my hood up and started walking toward the other truck, my boots crunching through the snow. The rest area was small, just a parking lot, a couple of picnic tables buried under snow, and a bathroom building that looked closed for the winter. There were no tracks in the snow except my own. No footprints, no tire marks except the ruts I'd just made coming in. Like the other truck had been sitting there for hours, long enough for the snow to erase any evidence of how it arrived. I walked up to the driver's side and shined my flashlight up at the cab. Empty. No driver, no sleeping bag, no coffee cups, nothing. The cab was completely empty, like the truck had just rolled off a factory floor and driven itself here. I tried the door handle. Locked. I walked around the truck, shining my light into the windows, checking the trailer. Everything was locked up tight. The trailer looked like a standard dry van. No refrigeration unit, no markings or company logos, just a plain white trailer covered in road grime and snow. I knocked on the door. "Hey, anyone in there?" My voice sounded wrong in the cold air, flat and small, like the storm was swallowing the sound before it could travel more than a few feet. No answer. I went back to my truck and sat in the cab with the heat blasting, staring at the empty Peterbilt. It didn't make sense, even if the driver was in the bathroom, and the bathroom looked locked up.
For winter, there should have been tracks, should have been some sign of activity, but there was nothing. I decided to wait. Maybe the driver would come back. Maybe I could talk to them, find out if they were experiencing the same thing I was. Maybe we could figure it out together. I waited for 20 minutes. Nobody came. At 12:15 a.m., I got back on the highway. The Peterbilt was still sitting there in my mirror as I pulled away, just a shape under the light pole, getting smaller and smaller until the snow swallowed it completely. And when I glanced in my mirror a few minutes later, the headlights were back, following me, maintaining their distance like they always did. I wondered if it was the same truck. I wondered if it had ever stopped at all. At 12:52 a.m., I passed mile marker 212 for the 7th time. Story 3. The night stretched on. That's the only way I can describe it. Stretched, like time itself was being pulled thin and extended beyond its normal shape. My watch said it was 2:30 a.m. when I passed marker 212 for the 8th time, but it felt like I'd been driving for days, weeks. I couldn't remember what it felt like to not be in this truck, on this highway, watching these same markers scroll past. I'd stopped logging the times. My hand hurt from writing, and besides, what was the point? I was stuck in some kind of loop, and documenting it wasn't going to get me unstuck. The truck behind me was still there, always there. I'd stopped trying to interact with it, stopped trying to slow down or speed up or figure out what it was. It was just part of the landscape now, like the snow and the markers and the endless highway. Around 3 a.m., or what my watch claimed was 3 a.m., I noticed something new. The radio static had changed. It was still there, still that constant background crackle, but now it had a rhythm to it. Not quite music, not quite speech, but something patterned, like Morse code maybe, or some other kind of signal I didn't know how to read. I turned up the volume and listened closely. The pattern repeated every minute or so. 3 short bursts of static, then 2 long ones, then silence for about 10 seconds, then it started again. 3 short, 2 long, silence. 3 short, 2 long, silence. I tried responding to it, keyed up my mic and clicked it 3 times, then twice, then waited. Nothing changed. The pattern just kept repeating, steady and mechanical and completely indifferent to anything I did. At 4:27 a.m., I passed a highway sign that said Fairbanks, 120 miles. I'd seen that sign before, many times, but the distance was wrong. Last time I'd seen it, it had said 115 miles. Before that, 118 miles. The numbers kept changing, never getting consistently smaller like they should if I was actually making progress. Sometimes they went up, sometimes down, like the city was moving around, refusing to get closer. I was starting to have trouble remembering what Fairbanks looked like. I knew I'd been there hundreds of times. I knew the truck stops and the restaurants and the loading docks, but when I tried to picture them in my mind, the images were fuzzy and indistinct, like old photographs that had faded in the sun. I could remember that I'd been there, but I couldn't remember the actual experience of being there. The same was true for Anchorage. I'd started from Anchorage, I knew that. I'd written it down, but I couldn't quite remember the details anymore. Had I stopped for fuel before leaving? Had I talked to anyone? What had the weather been like? It was slipping away, all of it, replaced by this endless loop of highway and snow and mile markers that told lies. At 4:15 a.m., the headlights behind me got closer. Not suddenly, gradually, so gradually that I almost didn't notice at first. But over the course of maybe 10 minutes, the truck closed the distance from its usual 100 yards to about 50 yards, still maintaining that constant distance, just a shorter one now. I watched it in my mirrors. I could see the truck more clearly now. It was definitely an old Peterbilt, maybe from the 80s or early 90s. Dark paint, hard to tell the color in my red taillights. Tall exhaust stacks, classic long-nose design. And the cab was empty. I could see that now too. No driver, just an empty seat visible through the windshield, and the truck rolling along on its own, following me through the storm. I should have been terrified. I probably was somewhere deep down, but mostly I just felt tired. The strangeness had worn through my ability to react to it. An empty truck following me was no stranger than mile markers that repeated, or highways that looped, or distances that changed. It was all part of the same impossible situation, and fear wasn't going to help me navigate it. At 5:03 a.m., I passed a green highway sign that said, "Welcome to Alaska, the last frontier." I'd seen that sign when I'd crossed into Alaska from Canada on my way to Anchorage. It should have been hundreds of miles south of here, at the border. But there it was, right beside the highway, covered in snow, welcoming me to a state I supposedly been driving through all night. The empty truck behind me passed the sign at exactly the same moment I did. I kept driving. At 5:45 a.m., dawn should have been starting to break. This far north in February, sunrise wasn't until almost 10 a.m., but you usually got some pre-dawn light starting around 6. The sky should have been shifting from black to deep blue, stars fading, that first hint of the coming day. But it stayed dark, completely dark. No hint of dawn, no lightening of the sky, nothing. Just the same absolute blackness I'd been driving through all night, broken only by my headlights and the red glow of my taillights reflecting off the snow. I checked my watch, definitely 5:45 a.m., but the night wasn't ending. At 6:30 a.m., I should have been late for my delivery. The crab was supposed to be in Fairbanks by 6 a.m. I'd already failed. The client would be angry, Janet would be furious. I'd probably lose the contract.
But I couldn't bring myself to care. None of that seemed real anymore. The client, Janet, the deadline, they were all part of some other world that I'd left behind when I entered this storm. Or maybe they never existed at all. Maybe I'd made them up, a story I told myself to justify why I was out here driving in circles through the dark. At 7:12 a.m., I passed mile marker 212 again. I'd lost count of how many times now. 10, 12? It didn't matter. The empty truck was still following me, closer now, maybe 30 yards back. At 8 a.m., the sun should have been up, not all the way up, but visible, painting the snow pink and orange and all those colors you see in winter sunrises. But the sky was still black, still night, still the same endless darkness I've been driving through. My watch insisted it was 8 a.m.,
The dashboard clock agreed, but the sun didn't come up. I started to wonder if it ever would. At 8:47 a.m., and I was still going by my watch because what else did I have, I saw lights ahead of me for the first time. Not headlights, building lights. The yellow-orange glow of sodium vapor lamps, the kind they use in parking lots, and underneath them, the shape of buildings. A truck stop. I almost cried with relief. A truck stop meant people, meant other drivers, a restaurant, a store, fuel pumps, a phone that might work, meant civilization and help and an end to this nightmare of empty highway. I took the exit, following the signs for Bear Paw Travel Center, fuel, food, lodging. The parking lot was full. Dozens of trucks, all lined up in neat rows, all with their running lights on. I found a spot toward the back and pulled in, parking between a red Kenworth and a blue Volvo. Both were running, exhausts puffing steam into the cold air. I shut down my engine for the first time in, I didn't know how long, hours. The sudden silence was shocking. I'd gotten so used to the constant rumble of the diesel engine, the hiss of the air system, the rattle of the cab, that the absence of it felt wrong, like the world had been muted. I sat there for a minute, just breathing, looking at the truck stop. It was a big place, 2 stories, probably had a restaurant and a store and showers. The parking lot lights cast harsh shadows across the snow. I could see footprints leading from some of the trucks to the building, which was encouraging. Real people making real tracks. I grabbed my wallet and my phone, still no signal, and climbed out of the cab. The cold was brutal. Had to be 20 below, maybe colder. My breath crystallized instantly, forming ice on the edge of my hood. I walked quickly toward the building, following the packed-down path through the snow that dozens of other drivers had made. The entrance had a double set of doors, an airlock to keep the heat in. I pushed through into the warmth and bright lights of the truck stop interior and stopped. The place was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of everything. The front counter where you normally check in or pay for fuel was bare. No cash register, no computer, no clerk. The aisles that should have been full of snacks and drinks and trucker supplies were empty. The restaurant area had tables and chairs, but no menus, no salt shakers, no napkin dispensers. Nothing. The lights were on, the heat was running, but there was no one here and no sign that anyone had ever been here. I walked through the aisles, my boots echoing on the tile floor. "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice echoed back at me, hollow and strange. I went to the restaurant area and looked into the kitchen through the servant window. Empty. No equipment, no food, no dishes, just bare stainless steel counters and an empty grill. I tried the bathrooms. They were there, sinks, toilets, paper towel dispensers, but they had the same unused quality as everything else, like they were props in a stage play, placed there to suggest the idea of a bathroom without actually being functional. I went back outside. The parking lot was still full of trucks. All of them still running, still puffing exhaust into the cold air. I walked up to the red Kenworth I'd parked next to and looked in the windows. Empty. No driver, no sleeping bag, no personal items, just an empty cab. I tried the blue Volvo, same thing. I went down the row, checking truck after truck, all of them empty, all of them running, all of them just sitting there in the parking lot with their lights on, waiting for drivers who weren't there. The empty Peterbilt that had been following me was parked at the far end of the lot. I recognized it by the shape, the tall stacks. It was sitting there with its lights off now, engine silent, just another empty truck in a parking lot of empty trucks. I stood in the middle of the parking lot, surrounded by dozens of idling trucks, and felt the full weight of my situation settle onto me like the cold. This wasn't just a navigation problem. This wasn't GPS failure or bad weather or even some kind of psychological break. This was something else, something bigger and stranger than I had words for. The truck stop existed, the parking lot existed, the trucks existed, but they were all hollow, all empty, all stage props in some elaborate show that I was the only audience for. I got back in my truck and started the engine. The familiar rumble was comforting, even if nothing else was. I sat there for a while, trying to decide what to do. Going back onto the highway meant more of the same,
More loops, more repeated mile markers, more impossible geography. But staying here seemed like a non-option. There was nothing here. No food, no people, no help. At 9:30 a.m., still dark, still night, sun still refusing to rise, I pulled out of the parking lot and got back on the highway. All the other trucks stayed where they were, except one. The empty Peterbilt followed me back onto the highway, taking the entrance ramp about 30 seconds after I did, falling into position 30 yards behind me, headlights cutting through the snow. We drove north together, toward Fairnax or away from it or in circles around it. I didn't know anymore. I just drove because it was all I knew how to do. Story 4. At 11:17 a.m., my watch stopped. Not the battery dying, the second hand just stopped moving, frozen between the 23 and 24 second marks. I tapped the crystal a few times, but it didn't help. The watch just sat there showing 11:17 and 23 seconds, frozen in that moment like it had decided that was enough. Time didn't need to go any further. The dashboard clock was still running though. It said 11:19 a.m., 2 minutes ahead of my watch, and still counting. I didn't know which one to believe, or if it mattered.
The snow had changed. It was still falling, still thick enough to make visibility terrible, but the flakes looked different now, bigger somehow, and slower, like they were falling through syrup instead of air. And when they hit the windshield, they didn't melt right away. They stuck there for a few seconds, long enough for me to see their shapes, perfect six-pointed stars, every one identical, before the wipers swept them away. I'd driven through a lot of snow in 17 years, and I'd never seen flakes that all looked exactly the same. At 11:43 a.m., according to the dashboard clock, since my watch wasn't helping anymore, the CB static changed again. The pattern of 3 short, 2 long bursts was gone. Now it was just steady white noise, but underneath it, I could hear something else. Voices, maybe. Too faint to make out words, but definitely human-sounding. Multiple voices, talking over each other, like I was listening to a distant conversation in another room. I turned up the volume as high as it would go and listened closely. The voices rose and fell, sometimes louder, sometimes softer, but never clear enough to understand. They had a rhythm to them, though, almost musical, and occasionally one voice would separate from the others, a little louder, a little clearer, before being swallowed back into the general noise. And then I heard my own voice. It came through the speaker, distorted and layered with static, but unmistakably mine. Marker 212, 5th time, truck following. It was what I'd said hours ago, talking into the CB when I was trying to raise other drivers. But I was hearing it now, played back to me through the same speaker, like the radio had recorded it and was replaying it. I grabbed the mic. Who's doing this? Who's on this channel? The voices continued, indifferent to my question, and then another fragment of my own voice. Janet, I'm having some issues up here. That was from the phone call, the one-sided conversation I'd had with my dispatcher when she tried to call and I couldn't hear her. But I'd been talking into the phone, not the CB. How was the radio playing it back? More fragments followed, scattered among the other voices, little pieces of everything I'd said over the past hours. Anyone out there? This is Polar Bear. Navigation issue here. You hearing me? They were all my words, my voice, chopped up and shuffled and played back at random, like something was sampling everything I'd said, collecting it, studying it. I put the mic down and turned the volume back to normal. The voices continued their murmur underneath the static, occasionally spitting out a fragment of my own speech, a word or two before moving on. At 12:04 p.m., I passed mile marker 212 again. The empty Peterbilt passed it exactly when I did, maintaining its position 30 yards behind me. I'd been thinking about that truck a lot, thinking about what it meant. The obvious answer was that it was following me, but that wasn't quite right. Following implied intention, implied a driver making choices, but the truck moved too perfectly, too precisely. It matched my speed exactly, maintained exactly the same distance, turned when I turned. It wasn't following me, it was mirroring me,
moving when I moved, stopping when I stopped, locked into the same pattern, like a reflection. At 12:30 p.m., I passed another rest area, different from the last one. The sign said Pipeline View Rest Area instead of whatever the other one had been called. But when I took the exit, when I pulled into the parking lot, it was identical. Same layout, same picnic tables buried in snow, same bathroom building that looked closed for winter, and sitting under the same light pole in the same spot, the same empty Peterbilt. I didn't bother getting out this time. I already knew what I'd find. Empty building, empty truck, no tracks, no people. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, watching the empty truck in my headlights. The truck that had been following me was nowhere to be seen. It hadn't taken the exit with me. Or maybe it had, and it was sitting somewhere else in the lot. Or maybe it was the same truck as the one under the light pole, and the whole concept of two separate trucks was just my mind trying to make sense of something that didn't follow normal rules. When I pulled back onto the highway, the truck was there again in my mirrors, 30 yards back, always 30 yards back. At 1:15 p.m., I found a receipt in the cup holder that I didn't remember putting there. It was from the Bear Paw Travel Center, the empty truck stop I'd visited hours ago. The receipt was for fuel, 127 gallons, $508.47, dated February 10th, 2023. Tomorrow's date. I checked my other receipts, the ones I'd collected over the past few weeks. They were all still there in my logbook where I kept them, all with the dates I remembered. But this new one was dated tomorrow for fuel I hadn't bought at a truck stop that hadn't had any fuel pumps. I looked at the dashboard fuel gauge, 3/4 of a tank, same as it had been hours ago. I'd been driving for what felt like half a day, but the gauge hadn't moved. The truck was running on the same tank of fuel, endless, never depleting. I put the receipt in my logbook with the others and kept driving. At 2:07 p.m., the voices on the CB got louder, clearer. I could almost make out words now, almost understand what they were saying. But every time I focused on one voice, tried to isolate it from the others, it would fade back into the static, and another one would rise up to replace it. And more of my own voice, more fragments. Should have been in Fairfax. Something is very wrong. Mile marker 212. Anyone out there?
At 2:45 p.m., I saw another truck on the highway, not behind me, ahead of me. Tail lights cutting through the snow, moving in the same direction I was, maybe a half-mile ahead. I sped up, trying to close the distance. Maybe it was a real truck this time, with a real driver who could tell me what was happening. Maybe we could figure this out together. But no matter how much I increased my speed, the truck ahead stayed the same distance away. Half a mile, always half a mile. I pushed up to 60 miles per hour, faster than was safe in these conditions, but the distance didn't change. I checked my mirrors. The empty Peterbilt was still there, 30 yards back, easily keeping pace with my increased speed. I slowed back down to 45. The truck ahead maintained its distance. The truck behind maintained its distance. We drove in formation, 3 trucks in a line, separated by gaps that never changed, heading north through the endless snow toward a destination that never got closer. At 3:33 p.m., I passed a sign that said Fairbanks, 78 miles. The same sign I'd seen hours ago, with the same distance. I'd been driving north for over 12 hours, and Fairbanks was still 78 miles away. At 4:52 p.m., exactly 12 hours after I'd first passed mile marker 212, I passed it again. I don't know which number this was. 15th time? 20th? I'd stopped counting. The dashboard clock said 4:52 p.m. My watch was still frozen at 11:17. Outside it was still dark, still night. The sun had never risen. February 10th should have started hours ago. Dawn should have come and gone. The sky should be getting ready for afternoon. that pale blue winter light you get in Alaska in the short days. But it was still night, still the darkness I'd been driving through since I'd entered the storm. How long had it been? The clock said about 14 hours since I'd left Anchorage, but it felt longer, felt like days, felt like I'd been driving forever, that everything before the storm was just a fading dream, and this was the reality, this highway, this snow, these mile markers, forever. At 5:20 p.m., the voices on the CB resolved into clarity for just a moment, long enough to hear a full sentence, spoken in a voice that might have been mine but distorted, stretched, like it was coming from very far away or very long ago. "You're still on the road, Marcus. You never left." Then it collapsed back into static and murmurs. I grabbed the mic with shaking hands. "Who are you? What do you want?" The voices continued their incomprehensible murmur, and then another fragment of my own voice from earlier, asking the same question. "Who are you?" At 6:08 p.m., I passed the Denali National Park sign again, still 78 miles. The scratch in the bottom left corner was still there. Everything was still exactly the same. The truck ahead of me passed the sign at the same moment. The truck behind me passed the sign at the same moment. 3 trucks, perfectly synchronized, moving through a landscape that refused to change. At 7:15 p.m., I found another receipt in the cup holder. This one was from a restaurant in Fairbanks called the Silver Gulch Brewery, dated February 11th, 2023, 2 days from now. The receipt showed a meal, burger, fries, coffee, total $18.47. At the bottom, in the signature line, was my handwriting, my actual signature, not a printed name, and a tip calculation showing I'd left $3. I didn't remember eating there. I'd never even heard of the place. But there was my signature, proof that I'd been there, or would be there, or was there in some version of time that wasn't quite aligned with this one. I checked my wallet. I had $127 in cash. The receipt showed I'd paid in cash, but all my money was still there, nothing missing. At 8:04 p.m., the truck ahead of me turned on its hazard lights and started to slow down. I slowed too, watching as it pulled onto the shoulder and came to a stop. Its brake lights glowed red through the snow. I pulled up behind it, maybe 50 feet back, and put my truck in park, left the engine running. In my mirror, the empty Peterbilt had stopped too, maintaining its 30-yard distance. 3 trucks, all stopped on the shoulder, all running, all waiting for something. I got out and walked toward the truck ahead. The wind hit me immediately, nearly knocking me sideways. The temperature had dropped even more. I'd guess 30 below now, maybe colder. Dangerous cold, the kind of cold where exposed skin freezes in minutes. I got to the driver's door and looked up at the cab. Empty. I tried the handle. Locked. I walked around the truck, checking the trailer, the other side. Everything locked. Everything empty, just like the others. But something was different about this one. On the driver's door, scratched into the paint like someone had used a key or a knife, were words, "Turn around." Fresh scratches. The metal underneath was still bright, not rusted or weathered. Someone had carved those words minutes ago, maybe while I was watching. I looked around the empty highway, nothing but snow and darkness and the 3 trucks sitting on the shoulder like toys on a shelf. "Turn around," I said out loud, to no one, to the storm. "There's nowhere else to go." The wind howled, the snow fell, and the 3 trucks sat there, 2 empty, and 1 with me standing outside in the killing cold, trying to understand a message that didn't have an answer. I got back in my truck and sat there, heater blasting, staring at those scratched words in my headlights. Turn around. But I tried turning around. The mile markers went backward no matter which direction I drove. South became north, became south, became nothing, just a road that looped on itself, like a Mobius strip. At 8:48 p.m., I pulled back onto the highway. The truck with the message stayed on the shoulder. In my mirror, I watched it get smaller and smaller until the snow swallowed it. The empty Peterbilt followed me, always following, always there. At 9:12 p.m., I saw headlights coming toward me. Southbound traffic, finally. Another truck heading in the opposite direction. We were going to pass each other. I'd be able to see the driver, maybe get a look at a license plate, something to prove that other people existed, that I wasn't the only thing moving through this frozen loop.
For winter, there should have been tracks, should have been some sign of activity, but there was nothing. I decided to wait. Maybe the driver would come back. Maybe I could talk to them, find out if they were experiencing the same thing I was. Maybe we could figure it out together. I waited for 20 minutes. Nobody came. At 12:15 a.m., I got back on the highway. The Peterbilt was still sitting there in my mirror as I pulled away, just a shape under the light pole, getting smaller and smaller until the snow swallowed it completely. And when I glanced in my mirror a few minutes later, the headlights were back, following me, maintaining their distance like they always did. I wondered if it was the same truck. I wondered if it had ever stopped at all. At 12:52 a.m., I passed mile marker 212 for the 7th time. Story 3. The night stretched on. That's the only way I can describe it. Stretched, like time itself was being pulled thin and extended beyond its normal shape. My watch said it was 2:30 a.m. when I passed marker 212 for the 8th time, but it felt like I'd been driving for days, weeks. I couldn't remember what it felt like to not be in this truck, on this highway, watching these same markers scroll past. I'd stopped logging the times. My hand hurt from writing, and besides, what was the point? I was stuck in some kind of loop, and documenting it wasn't going to get me unstuck. The truck behind me was still there, always there. I'd stopped trying to interact with it, stopped trying to slow down or speed up or figure out what it was. It was just part of the landscape now, like the snow and the markers and the endless highway. Around 3 a.m., or what my watch claimed was 3 a.m., I noticed something new. The radio static had changed. It was still there, still that constant background crackle, but now it had a rhythm to it. Not quite music, not quite speech, but something patterned, like Morse code maybe, or some other kind of signal I didn't know how to read. I turned up the volume and listened closely. The pattern repeated every minute or so. 3 short bursts of static, then 2 long ones, then silence for about 10 seconds, then it started again. 3 short, 2 long, silence. 3 short, 2 long, silence. I tried responding to it, keyed up my mic and clicked it 3 times, then twice, then waited. Nothing changed. The pattern just kept repeating, steady and mechanical and completely indifferent to anything I did. At 4:27 a.m., I passed a highway sign that said Fairbanks, 120 miles. I'd seen that sign before, many times, but the distance was wrong. Last time I'd seen it, it had said 115 miles. Before that, 118 miles. The numbers kept changing, never getting consistently smaller like they should if I was actually making progress. Sometimes they went up, sometimes down, like the city was moving around, refusing to get closer. I was starting to have trouble remembering what Fairbanks looked like. I knew I'd been there hundreds of times. I knew the truck stops and the restaurants and the loading docks, but when I tried to picture them in my mind, the images were fuzzy and indistinct, like old photographs that had faded in the sun. I could remember that I'd been there, but I couldn't remember the actual experience of being there. The same was true for Anchorage. I'd started from Anchorage, I knew that. I'd written it down. But I couldn't quite remember the details anymore. Had I stopped for fuel before leaving? Had I talked to anyone? What had the weather been like? It was slipping away, all of it, replaced by this endless loop of highway and snow and mile markers that told lies.
At 4:15 a.m., the headlights behind me got closer. Not suddenly, gradually. So gradually that I almost didn't notice at first. But over the course of maybe 10 minutes, the truck closed the distance from its usual 100 yards to about 50 yards, still maintaining that constant distance, just a shorter one now. I watched it in my mirrors. I could see the truck more clearly now. It was definitely an old Peterbilt, maybe from the 80s or early 90s. Dark paint, hard to tell the color in my red taillights, tall exhaust stacks, classic long-nose design. And the cab was empty. I could see that now too. No driver, just an empty seat visible through the windshield, and the truck rolling along on its own, following me through the storm. I should have been terrified. I probably was somewhere deep down, but mostly I just felt tired. The strangeness had worn through my ability to react to it. An empty truck following me was no stranger than mile markers that repeated, or highways that looped, or distances that changed. It was all part of the same impossible situation, and fear wasn't going to help me navigate it. At 5:03 a.m., I passed a green highway sign that said, "Welcome to Alaska, the last frontier." I'd seen that sign when I'd crossed into Alaska from Canada on my way to Anchorage. It should have been hundreds of miles south of here, at the border. But there it was, right beside the highway, covered in snow, welcoming me to a state I supposedly been driving through all night. The empty truck behind me passed the sign at exactly the same moment I did. I kept driving. At 5:45 a.m., dawn should have been starting to break. This far north in February, sunrise wasn't until almost 10 a.m., but you usually got some pre-dawn light starting around 6. The sky should have been shifting from black to deep blue, stars fading, that first hint of the coming day. But it stayed dark, completely dark. No hint of dawn, no lightening of the sky, nothing. Just the same absolute blackness I'd been driving through all night, broken only by my headlights and the red glow of my taillights reflecting off the snow. I checked my watch, definitely 5:45 a.m., but the night wasn't ending. At 6:30 a.m., I should have been late for my delivery. The crab was supposed to be in Fairbanks by 6 a.m. I'd already failed. The client would be angry, Janet would be furious. I'd probably lose the contract.
"What are you?" I asked. "What is this?" No answer. The silence pressed in on me from all sides. I went back outside. The parking lot was full of trucks, and I knew without checking that if I looked inside each cab, I'd find another version of myself. 35 inside the building, maybe 50 or 60 in the trucks. Hundreds of me maybe, all stuck here, all frozen at different moments, all part of the same impossible loop. The empty Peterbilt was still in the lot, still parked under the same light pole. I walked over to it and tried the door. Still locked. But now I could see through the snow-covered window more clearly, and I realized the cab wasn't empty after all. There was someone in the driver's seat, not clearly visible, more like a shadow, a suggestion of a person, but definitely there. And as I watched, the shadow moved slightly, turned its head toward me. I stepped back. The figure in the cab became clearer. It was me, of course, another version of me, sitting in the driver's seat of the empty truck that had been following me all night. And it was looking at me now, making eye contact through the window, and its expression was sad, deeply, terribly sad, like it knew something I didn't, something that would break me if I understood it. I turned and walked back to my truck as fast as I could without running, got in the cab, started the engine, put it in gear. I had to get out of here, had to get back on the highway, back to the familiar pattern of driving and markers and snow. This place, with its frozen versions of me and its shadowy driver, was too much. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I looked in my mirror. The empty Peterbilt was pulling out too, falling into position behind me. And through its windshield, I could still see the shadow in the driver's seat, following me back onto the highway. At 12:15 a.m., now February 10th, according to the dashboard clock, I passed mile marker 212 again.
The shadow me and the Peterbilt passed it at the same moment. The snow had changed again. The flakes were smaller now, denser, falling straight down with no wind to push them. They accumulated on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear them, building up in the corners, creating tunnels of white that narrowed my vision with every passing mile. The CB voices were getting louder. I could make out words now, full sentences, though they didn't always make sense. Taking the exit at marker 190, but the exit wasn't there. Fuel gauge says empty, but I'm still driving. How many days has it been? Saw another truck, tried to follow it, ended up behind myself. Think I'm dead. Marker 212 again, always 212. Turn around. The sign said turn around. They were all different voices, but they were all my voice, variations on the same tone, the same inflection, the same exhaustion, like listening to a chorus of myself from different timelines or different loops, all broadcasting on the same frequency, all sharing their experiences of the same impossible highway. At 1:07 a.m., I passed a mile marker that was blank. No number, just a reflective white background with the black frame, a marker that had been erased or never filled in or forgotten. 3 markers later, I passed another one, also blank. And then marker 212 again, the dent still there, still the same marker, appearing among the blank ones like an anchor point, the only fixed reference in a highway that was losing its markers one by one. At 2:33 a.m., I found a photograph in my logbook that I didn't put there. It was old, faded, the colors washed out to pastels. It showed a truck stop, maybe the Bear Paw, hard to tell, with a figure standing in front of it. Me, but younger, maybe 10 years younger, with less gray in my beard, standing next to a different truck than the one I was driving now. And on the back, in handwriting that looked like mine but wasn't quite right, someone had written, "First Loop, February 2013, still don't understand." 10 years ago. I checked the other items in my logbook, found more photographs I didn't remember taking. Me standing next to mile marker 212, dated 2015. Me in the cab of a truck looking exhausted, dated 2017. Me at a rest area, dated 2019, all with notes on the back. 3rd loop, 7th loop, lost count. How long had I been doing this? How long had I been trapped on this highway, driving in circles, accumulating photographs and receipts and memories of loops I didn't remember living through? At 3:45 a.m., the highway split. I've been driving straight for hours, days maybe, but suddenly there was a fork in the road. 2 lanes diverging, both heading north, both disappearing into the snow. No signs indicating which way to go, no markers, just a choice, left or right. I slowed to a crawl, trying to see if there was any difference between the 2 paths. They looked identical. Same snow, same darkness, same reflector posts marking the shoulders. But one went left and one went right, and I had to choose. The empty Peterbilt stayed behind me, slowing when I slowed, waiting. I chose left. Arbitrary decision. Left felt right, so I took the left fork and accelerated back to highway speed. The road curved slightly, and for a moment I thought maybe this was it. Maybe I'd broken the loop by choosing a different path. But then the curve straightened out, and I passed a mile marker. Number 212. The dent still in the same place. I'd chosen left and ended up exactly where I'd been. At 4:15 a.m., the highway split again. Left or right? I chose right this time. Same result. Mile marker 212, 5 minutes later. At 4:52 a.m., the highway split again. This time I stopped at the fork and sat there, engine idling, trying to see if there was any clue about which way to go. The Peterbilt stopped behind me, 30 yards back, headlights steady in my mirrors. I tried the CB. If anyone can hear me, I'm at a fork in the road. Which way should I go? The voices murmured their usual incomprehensible chorus. Then one voice separated from the others, clear and distinct. Doesn't matter which way you go. All roads are the same road. You're choosing the same thing over and over. Then how do I choose something different? I asked. Stop choosing, stop driving. And do what? No answer. The silence faded back into the chorus. I sat at the fork for another 5 minutes, then chose straight ahead, threading between the two.
Diverging paths, driving onto the snowy medium that separated them. The truck bounced and lurched as I drove over uneven ground, but I kept going, forcing my way through. Maybe if neither choice was right, the answer was to reject the choice entirely. But the median narrowed and curved, and within a minute I was back on smooth pavement, and the highway closed in around me from both sides, and I was driving north on a single lane again. And up ahead I saw mile marker 212 approaching in my headlights. The dent was still there. At 5:30 a.m., I gave up trying to find a way out and focused instead on understanding what I was in. The loop was real, the highway was real, the truck was real, but they weren't operating under normal rules anymore. Space and time had become fluid, negotiable, looping back on themselves in ways that didn't make sense. I was driving through something that wasn't quite physical space anymore, somewhere that existed parallel to the real world, close enough to touch it but never quite connecting. A pocket dimension made of highway and snow and darkness, and I'd somehow driven into it without realizing, and now I couldn't find my way out. Or maybe I'd never been in the real world at all. Maybe I'd been here for years, for decades, driving the same route over and over, and the memories I had of other deliveries, other routes, other years, maybe those were just dreams I'd constructed to make the endless driving bearable. The photographs suggested that. 2013, 2015, 2017, 2019. Different loops, different years, all showing me in the same place, on the same highway, still driving, still trying to reach Fairbanks. At 6:04 a.m., dawn should have broken. The sun should have been rising, painting the sky, ending the night. But it stayed dark. The night didn't end. The sun didn't rise. I'd been driving through darkness for over 15 hours now, maybe longer. The clock said it was morning, but the world outside said otherwise. At 7:15 a.m., I passed the Denali sign again, still 78 miles. The scratch in the corner still there, exactly as I remembered. And as I passed it, I saw something else. Another sign, smaller, barely visible in the snow. It said, "You've been here before." I looked in my mirror. The sign was gone. Just the Denali sign, nothing else. But I had been here before, many times. I knew every detail of this highway now, every marker, every sign, every rest area. I'd memorized the loop without meaning to, driven it so many times that it was burned into my brain like a map. At 8:47 a.m., the voices on the CB resolved into clarity again, all speaking at once, a chorus of my own voice from different times. First loop, still don't understand. Been driving for 3 days, fuel gauge never moves. Saw myself today, driving south, didn't recognize me at first. Found pictures in my logbook, don't remember taking them. Think I've been here for years. Marker 212 again. Can't remember what Fairbanks looks like. Can't remember why I started driving. Can't remember anything before the storm. This is the only thing that's ever been real. Mile marker 212. Always 212. Always. And then, silence. Complete, absolute silence. The voices cut off all at once, and the CB speaker went dead, and the only sound was the rumble of the engine and the beat of the wipers, and my own breathing in the cold cab. At 9:12 a.m., I passed mile marker 212 again, and this time something was different. There was a figure standing next to the marker, a person, visible in my headlights, standing on the shoulder in the snow. Me. I was standing there next to the marker, wearing the same clothes I had on, watching myself drive past. And as I passed, the figure on the shoulder raised one hand in a slow wave, then turned and walked away into the darkness, disappearing between one step and the next. The empty Peterbilt drove past the marker at the same moment,
and in my mirror, I saw the figure appear again behind me, standing on the shoulder, watching my truck recede into the distance. How many versions of me were there on this highway? How many had gotten out and walked away into the snow? And where did they go when they left the road? At 10:04 a.m., my phone rang. Not vibrated, not lit up silently, actually rang with sound, the ringtone I'd set for Janet's calls. I grabbed it and answered. "Janet? Janet, can you hear me?" "Marcus, Marcus, where are you? The client is furious. The shipment was supposed to be there hours ago." "Janet, I'm stuck. I'm on the highway. I've been driving all night, but I can't seem to reach Fairbanks. Something's wrong with the road." "What are you talking about? The GPS shows you're almost there. You should be pulling in any minute." "That's not... Janet, the GPS is wrong. I'm nowhere near Fairbanks. I've been passing the same mile markers over and over. Something's happening. Something's wrong with..." The call dropped. The phone went back to showing no signal. But she'd said the GPS showed me almost at Fairbanks. Which GPS? The truck's GPS showed me on the park's highway in the middle of nowhere. But maybe there was another GPS somewhere else, tracking a different version of me on a different loop. A version that was almost to Fairbanks, almost finished with the delivery, almost free. Or maybe I'd never been in the real world at all. Maybe I'd been here for years, for decades, driving the same route over and over, and the memories I had of other deliveries, other routes, other years, maybe those were just dreams I'd constructed to make the endless driving bearable.
At 11:17 a.m., the exact time my watch had stopped the day before, I passed through a patch of fog. It came out of nowhere, thick and gray and completely out of place in the middle of a snowstorm. I slowed down, visibility dropping to almost nothing, just driving on instinct in the feel of the road. And then I was through it, back into the snow, and everything was different. The highway was empty. The Peterbilt behind me was gone. The snow had stopped. The sky was lighter. Not day, not dawn, but less aggressively dark, like the night was finally starting to release its grip. I checked my mirrors. No truck, no headlights, just empty highway behind me. I looked at the clock. It said 11:17 a.m., same as when I'd entered the fog, like no time had passed. Up ahead, I saw lights, real lights, a town maybe, buildings, civilization. The highway sign confirmed it. Fairbanks, 5 miles. 5 miles, not 78, not 120, 5 miles. I was almost there. I felt something crack inside my chest, some tension I'd been holding for hours, suddenly releasing. I was out. Whatever that fog had been, I'd driven through it and come out the other side, back into the real world, back onto the real highway. I was going to make it to Fairbanks. I was going to complete the delivery. Everything was going to be okay. Story 6. The city lights grew brighter as I drove. I could see the glow of Fairbanks ahead, that orange sodium vapor haze that hangs over cities at night, reflecting off low clouds. I'd seen it 100 times before, approaching from the south, and it looked exactly right, exactly normal. I passed a mile marker, 358. That was right. Fairbanks was around mile marker 362 on the Parks Highway. I was 4 miles out, almost there. The relief was overwhelming. I realized I'd been holding my breath and forced myself to breathe normally. My hands were cramping from gripping the wheel too tight. My shoulders ached. My eyes burned from staring at the highway for too long. But I was out. I was free. The nightmare was over. At 11:34 a.m., I passed the first exit for Fairbanks, airport exit. I wasn't taking it, my delivery was on the other side of town, but seeing it was like seeing proof that I'd actually made it. Real exit, real signs, real city. At 11:42 a.m., I took the Steese Expressway exit and headed east toward the industrial district where the distributor was located. The streets were plowed, traffic lights were working, everything looked normal. Dawn was breaking now, pale gray light filtering through the clouds, revealing the city around me. I'd made it. Against all odds, against all logic, I'd somehow driven through the impossible loop and come out the other side. I didn't understand how. The fog, maybe. Or maybe I'd just finally found the right choice at one of those forks, and it had led me back to reality. I didn't care. I was just grateful to be here. At 12:03 p.m., I pulled up to the loading dock at Fairbanks Premium Seafood Distributors. The building looked right, corrugated steel siding, big rolling doors for the loading bays, a small office attached to one side. I'd delivered here before, many times. I backed the trailer up to bay number 3 like I always did and shut down the engine. Sat there for a moment, just breathing, letting the reality of it sink in. I'd made it. The delivery was late, but I'd made it. I grabbed my paperwork and climbed out of the cab. The cold hit me, real cold, not the strange, distant cold from the highway, but actual Alaska winter cold that stung my face and made my eyes water. It felt good. It felt real. I walked around to the trailer and opened the doors. The refrigeration unit was still running, temperature still holding at -10. The load looked good, all the boxes still stacked neatly, nothing shifted or damaged. I went to the office door and knocked. A young guy answered, maybe early 20s, wearing a company jacket with a name tag that said Kyle. Delivery from Anchorage, King Crab. Sorry I'm late. Kyle frowned. We weren't expecting a delivery today. What? No, I've got the paperwork right here. $80,000 of king crab, supposed to be here yesterday morning. I handed him the manifest. He looked at it, then looked at me. This is dated February 9th. Right, I was supposed to deliver on the 9th by 6 a.m. I hit weather, got delayed, but the load's still good, temperature stayed constant. Today's February 23rd. I stared at him. What? February 23rd. You're 2 weeks late. No. I left Anchorage on the 9th, yesterday. I've been driving since yesterday afternoon. Kyle pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. The date said February 23rd, 2023. The time said 12:07 p.m. There's some mistake. Check your records. Check your deliveries. I'm only 1 day late. Kyle went back into the office and came back with a tablet. According to our system, your delivery was marked as a no-show on February 10th. The client canceled the order and went with another supplier. We've been trying to reach you for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, I repeated. The words didn't make sense. I'd been driving maybe 18 hours, 20 at most, not 2 weeks. That's impossible. Look, I don't know what happened, but you're 2 weeks late, and we don't need the shipment anymore. You'll need to take it back or dispose of it or whatever your protocol is. I stood there in the cold, trying to process this. 2 weeks? How could it have been 2 weeks? The clock in my truck said I left at 2 p.m. on February 9th and arrived at 12:03 p.m. on February 10th, 22 hours. But the rest of the world said it was February 23rd. Can I use your phone? I asked. I need to call my dispatcher. Kyle let me into the office. I called Janet's number. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. I left a message. Janet, it's Marcus. I'm in Fairbanks at the distributor. They're saying I'm 2 weeks late. I don't understand what's happening. Call me back.
I tried my wife's number. The same thing, voicemail. I left a message for her too, trying to sound calmer than I felt. Kyle was watching me from behind the counter. Are you okay, man? You look rough. I probably did look rough. I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept or eaten. Had I eaten anything during the drive? I had sandwiches in the truck, but I didn't remember eating them. Couldn't remember drinking anything either, though I must have. I need to figure out what's going on, I said. Can I use your computer? I need to check something. Kyle hesitated, then nodded. Sure, over there. I sat down at the computer and opened a browser, searched for February 2023 calendar. It came back showing February 23rd as today's date. Searched for recent news stories from Fairbanks, all dated within the last few days, February 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd. I checked my phone's calendar. It said February 23rd. I checked the weather history for the Parks Highway. There'd been a storm on February 9th, that matched my memory, but it had cleared up by February 10th. No major weather since then. Everything was telling me the same thing.
Somehow, impossibly, 2 weeks had passed while I was driving through that loop. I thanked Kyle and went back to my truck. Sat in the cab with the engine off, the cold slowly seeping in, trying to make sense of this. Maybe I'd had some kind of medical episode, a stroke or a seizure or something that had made me lose time. Maybe I'd been driving in circles for 2 weeks without realizing it, hallucinating the mile markers and the loops and the impossible highway, when really I'd just been driving around randomly, lost in some kind of fugue state. But the fuel, I checked the gauge, 3/4 of a tank, same as it had been during the loop. If I'd been driving for 2 weeks, I should have run out of fuel days ago, should have had to stop and refuel multiple times. Unless I had, and I just didn't remember. I started the engine and drove to the nearest gas station, pulled up to the pump and checked the fuel receipt printer. If I'd fueled up recently, there should be a record. I filled the tank. It took about 40 gallons, which meant I'd been running on about 3/4 when I arrived, just like the gauge showed. The pump printed a receipt. I looked at my logbook, at the other receipts I'd collected. The most recent one before today was from February 9th at a station in Anchorage, right before I'd left. No refueling during the supposed 2 weeks I was lost. So either I'd driven for 2 weeks without refueling, impossible, or I really had only been driving for 22 hours, and something had caused the rest of the world to jump forward 2 weeks while I was gone. I didn't know which explanation was worse. I drove to a truck stop, a real one, with people and noise and life, and parked. Got out and walked inside, just to be around other humans, to prove to myself that the world was still real and I was part of it. The restaurant was busy with the lunch crowd. I got coffee and a burger and sat at the counter, listening to other drivers talk about loads and weather and all the normal things drivers talk about. It was comforting in a way I couldn't quite explain. Like I'd been in silence for so long that just hearing ordinary conversation was profound. My phone buzzed, a text from Janet. "Where have you been? Call me now." I went outside and called her. "Marcus? Jesus Christ, where have you been? You disappeared for 2 weeks." "I didn't disappear. I was driving. I've been trying to reach you." "We couldn't reach you at all. No phone calls, no texts, no check-ins. Your GPS went dark on February 9th and just came back online an hour ago. We thought you were dead. We filed a report with the troopers, had them search the highway. They didn't find anything." "I was on the highway the whole time. I got caught in some kind of, I don't know what it was. The road started looping. The mile markers repeated. I couldn't reach Fairbanks." Silence on the line. Then, "Marcus, are you feeling okay? Do you need me to send someone to check on you?" "I'm fine. I'm in Fairbanks now. The delivery's 2 weeks late. They don't want it anymore. What do you want me to do with the load?" "Bring it back to Anchorage. We'll deal with it. But Marcus, when you get back, you need to see a doctor. You need to get checked out. This isn't normal." "I know it's not normal, but I'm telling you what happened. I was driving and the highway changed. I couldn't get out." "Okay," Janet said, in the tone people use when they're humoring someone they think is unstable. "Okay, just bring the truck back. We'll figure it out." She hung up. I stood there in the parking lot looking at my truck, the same truck I'd been driving for the past day, or 2 weeks, depending on who you asked. It looked normal. Old but well-maintained, company logos on the doors, refrigerated trailer hooked up behind it, nothing strange or wrong about it. I walked around it, checking for damage, for anything unusual. Everything was normal. The trailer doors were locked, the refrigeration unit was running, the tires looked fine. I opened the driver's door and climbed up to check the cab. Everything was where I'd left it. My logbook, my cooler, my jacket on the passenger seat. I flipped through the logbook, looking at my entries. The last entry was from yesterday, from my perspective, at 9:07 p.m., marker 212, 5th time, truck following. But according to the date stamps on the earlier entries, yesterday had been February 9th, 2 weeks ago. I checked the odometer. It showed 287,442 miles. I tried to remember what it showed when I left Anchorage, but I couldn't. I usually logged the mileage when I started a trip, but I couldn't find that entry in my book. I checked the GPS history. The truck's GPS kept a log of everywhere it had been. I pulled up the log on the dashboard screen. It showed a route from Anchorage to Fairbanks, departing February 14th at 2:14 p.m., arriving February 23rd at 12:03 p.m. The route was normal, following the park's highway the whole way. No loops, no repeated sections, just a straight line from point A to point B. But it showed the trip taking 2 weeks instead of 1 day. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to reconcile what I remembered with what the data was telling me. I remembered the loops. I remembered mile marker 212 appearing over and over. I remembered the empty truck stop, the versions of myself, the voices on the CB. But the GPS said I'd just driven normally from Anchorage to Fairbanks, and it took 2 weeks for some reason. I checked the refrigerator unit logs. They showed the unit had been running continuously since February 9th, 2 weeks of continuous operation, which meant the load had been in the trailer for 2 weeks.
I got out and opened the trailer doors, hit by the blast of cold air from inside. The boxes were still stacked neatly. Everything looked normal. I pulled out a box and checked the temperature logs printed on the side. They showed steady -10 degrees for 2 weeks. The crab was probably still fine. Frozen crab can last months if the temperature stays constant. But I'd only loaded it 2 weeks ago, not yesterday. I closed the trailer and sat on the loading dock, trying to think. 2 possibilities. Either I'd experienced some kind of psychological break that made me hallucinate the entire loop while actually driving normally for 2 weeks, or something genuinely impossible had happened and I'd gotten caught in some kind of time distortion on the highway. The first possibility seemed more likely from a rational standpoint. Brains malfunction. People have psychotic episodes. Stress and isolation can do strange things to perception. But the second possibility felt more true. The memories were too vivid, too detailed. The loop had been real. The empty trucks, the repeated markers, the versions of myself, all real. I knew they were real in the same way you know your own name. And if they were real, then I'd driven through something that shouldn't exist and somehow emerged 2 weeks later instead of 1 day later, and I was probably not entirely free of it yet. At 2:30 p.m., I started the drive back to Anchorage. The route would take about 6 hours under normal conditions. I planned to drive straight through, no stops, no rest areas. I wanted to get back as quickly as possible, get back to familiar territory, get away from Fairbanks and whatever had happened on the highway between there and Anchorage. The first hour was fine. Normal traffic, plowed roads, clear weather. I passed trucks going both directions, saw cars and SUVs, everything normal. At 4:35 p.m., I passed mile marker 362. The number started counting down, which was correct for driving south. 361, 360, 359. All normal. At 4:15 p.m., I passed Denali sign, Denali National Park, 78 miles. The scratch in the bottom left corner was still there. I felt my chest tighten. The sign looked exactly the same as it had during the loop, exactly the same. But that didn't mean anything. It was the same sign. I'd driven past it 100 times before the loop. Of course it looked the same. Signs don't change. I kept driving, watched the mile markers count down. 340, 339, 338. All in order, all making sense. At 5:03 p.m., I passed mile marker 320. Sunset was starting, the sky turning from gray to darker gray, the short winter day ending. That was normal. That was right. At 5:52 p.m., I passed mile marker 300. At 6:14 p.m., I passed mile marker 300 again. I felt my blood go cold. The marker was the same number, same post, same location. I'd passed it 22 minutes ago, and here it was again. No, I said out loud. No, not again. Please, not again. I checked the GPS. It showed me heading south on the Parks Highway between Denali and Wasilla. The little blue dot was moving normally, following the line of the highway on the screen. I kept driving, watched for the next marker. 299 came up, which was correct, then 298, then 297. Maybe I'd misread the 300 marker. Maybe it had been 310 and I just glanced at it wrong. Easy mistake in the fading light. At 4:77 p.m., I passed mile marker 280. At 7:03 p.m., I passed mile marker 280 again. No, 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 no. My hands were shaking on the wheel. This couldn't be happening. I'd gotten out. I'd reached Fairbanks. I'd talked to real people. I was in the real world now. The loop was over. But the mile markers were repeating, just like before, just like they'd done for hours, for weeks while I was trapped. I tried the CB. Anyone out there? Anyone on this channel? Static. Then the familiar murmur of voices underneath, too faint to make out. I tried my phone. No signal. I checked my mirrors. No headlights behind me yet, but I knew they'd appear eventually. The empty Peterbilt, following me, always following me. At 7:35 p.m., I passed the Pipeline View rest area. Or maybe it was a different rest area with the same name. Or maybe all rest areas were the same rest area. I didn't know anymore. I took the exit. If this was starting again, I needed to stop and think, needed to figure out what was different this time, if anything. The parking lot was full of trucks, all empty, I knew, all mirrors of my own truck, or versions from different loops or echoes of drivers who got stuck before me. I parked and shut down the engine. The silence felt ominous now, loaded with meaning I didn't want to examine too closely. I went back to my truck and climbed into the cab, sat there with the engine off, the cold slowly seeping in, looking at my missing persons flyer in the flashlight beam. At 8:14 p.m., headlights appeared in my mirror. Big rig, old Peterbilt, tall exhaust stacks, empty cab. It sat there idling, headlights pointed at my truck, waiting for me to make a move. At 8:30 p.m., I started my engine and pulled back onto the highway. The Peterbilt followed. At 9:15 p.m., I passed mile marker 282. The dent was still there. At 9:15 p.m., I passed it again.
I was back in the loop, or I'd never left, or maybe there was no difference between those two things anymore. The highway stretched ahead of me, white and empty and endless. The snow started falling again, heavy and thick. The dashboard clock said February 23rd, but I didn't believe it. Time had lost all meaning. There was only the road now, the markers, the snow, the endless drive toward a destination I would never reach. The empty Peterbilt followed me through the darkness, maintaining its distance, always there. And somewhere ahead, or behind, or in some other loop entirely, other versions of me were driving the same highway, passing the same markers, making the same discoveries, experiencing the same dawning horror that there was no way out. We were all stuck here, all of us, forever. Story 7. At 10:47 p.m., though the date on the dashboard now flickered between February 23rd and February 9th, unable to decide which reality was real, I passed 3 trucks parked on the shoulder, all Freightliners, all the same model as mine, all with refrigerated trailers. I slowed down as I passed them. Each cab was empty, but through the windows I could see the interiors, and they were identical to mine. Same wear pattern on the driver's seat, same crack in the windshield, upper right corner, same air freshener hanging from the CB mic clip. They were my truck, all 3 of them. Somehow I was driving past 3 versions of my own truck, parked on the shoulder, waiting for something, or nothing, or me. The empty Peterbilt behind me slowed when I slowed, matching my speed perfectly. I thought about stopping, getting out and checking the trucks, looking for clues or evidence or something that would explain what was happening, but I knew what I'd find. Empty cabs, identical interiors, maybe more receipts from impossible dates, maybe more photographs of me standing next to mile markers documenting loops I didn't remember. I kept driving. At 11:23 p.m., the CB came to life with a voice that was clearly, unmistakably mine, but speaking words I hadn't said. If you're hearing this, you're already caught. The highway has you now.
It's been collecting us for years, maybe decades. Every driver who got caught in the storm, everyone who chose to keep driving instead of stopping, we're all here, all stuck on the same route, passing each other, mirrors and echoes and fragments. I grabbed the mic. Who are you? Which version? Does it matter? My voice asked from the speaker. We're all the same person, all made the same choices, all ended up here. There has to be a way out, I said. I got to Fairbanks. I talked to people. I was out. You thought you were out, the voice said, but you're still here, still driving, still passing marker 212. Fairbanks was just another loop, another layer. The highway has more depth than you understand. It can show you whatever you want to see, arrivals, deliveries, normal life, but underneath, you're still here, still driving. How do I really get out? Silence, long enough that I thought the connection had dropped. Then, I don't think you do. I think this is where we live now, the endless mile. Some of us have been here so long we can't remember anything else. Can you remember your wife's face? Can you really picture it in detail? I tried. I knew I had a wife. I knew her name was what? I couldn't remember her name. I knew I was married. I had the wedding ring to prove it, still on my finger, metal cold against my skin. But her name, her face, the sound of her voice, all of it was fuzzy, indistinct, like trying to remember a dream hours after waking. You're forgetting, my voice said from the CB. The longer you drive, the more the outside world fades. Eventually, all you'll have is the highway, just the highway forever, and you'll be okay with that because you won't remember there was ever anything else. I won't let that happen, I said. None of us wanted it to happen, but the highway is patient. It has all the time in the world. We don't. The connection broke. Static resumed its steady crackle. I tried to focus on memories. My wife, her name was Sarah. Sarah. I repeated it to myself like a mantra. Sarah. We'd been married for 12 years. We lived in... Where did we live? Washington? Oregon? Somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. A house with a blue door. Or was it red? The details were slipping away as I tried to hold on to them. At 12:15 a.m., February 24th now, or still February 9th, unable to decide which reality was real, I passed 3 trucks parked on the shoulder. All Freightliners, all the same model as mine, all with refrigerated trailers. I slowed down as I passed them. Each cab was empty, but through the windows I could see the interiors, and they were identical to mine. Same wear pattern on the driver's seat, same crack in the windshield upper right corner, same air freshener hanging from the CB mic. They were my truck, all 3 of them. Somehow I was driving past 3 versions of my own truck, parked on the shoulder, waiting for something, or nothing, or me. The empty Peterbilt behind me slowed when I slowed, matching my speed perfectly. I thought about stopping, getting out and checking the trucks, looking for clues or evidence or something that would explain what was happening, but I knew what I'd find. Empty cabs, identical interiors, maybe more receipts from impossible dates, maybe more photographs of me standing next to mile markers, documenting loops I didn't remember. I kept driving. At 12:15 a.m., the CB came to life with a voice that was clearly, unmistakably mine, but speaking words I hadn't said. If you're hearing this, you're already caught. The highway has you now. It's been collecting us for years, maybe decades. Every driver who got caught in the storm, everyone who chose to keep driving instead of stopping, we're all here, all stuck on the same route, passing each other, mirrors and echoes and fragments. I grabbed the mic. Who are you? Which version? Does it matter? My voice asked from the speaker. We're all the same person, all made the same choices, all ended up here. There has to be a way out, I said. I got to Fairbanks. I talked to people. I was out. You thought you were out, the voice said, But you're still here, still driving, still passing marker 212. Fairbanks was just another loop, another layer. The highway has more depth than you understand. It can show you whatever you want to see, arrivals, deliveries, normal life, but underneath you're still here, still driving. How do I really get out? Silence, long enough that I thought the connection had dropped. Then, I don't think you do. I think this is where we live now, the endless mile. Some of us have been here so long we can't remember anything else. Can you remember your wife's face? Can you really picture it in detail? I tried. I knew I had a wife. I knew her name was what? I couldn't remember her name. I knew I was married. I had the wedding ring to prove it, still on my finger, metal cold against my skin. But her name, her face, the sound of her voice, all of it was fuzzy, indistinct, like trying to remember a dream hours after waking. "You're forgetting," my voice said from the CB. "The longer you drive, the more the outside world fades. Eventually, all you'll have is the highway, just the highway forever, and you'll be okay with that because you won't remember there was ever anything else." "I won't let that happen," I said. None of us wanted it to happen, but the highway is patient. It has all the time in the world. We don't. The connection broke. Static resumed its steady crackle. I tried to focus on memories. My wife, her name was Sarah. Sarah. I repeated it to myself like a mantra. Sarah. We'd been married for 12 years. We lived in... Where did we live? Washington? Oregon? Somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. A house with a blue door. Or was it red? The details were slipping away as I tried to hold on to them. At 12:15 a.m., February 24th now, or still February 9th, unable to decide which reality was real, I passed 3 trucks parked on the shoulder. All Freightliners, all the same model as mine, all with refrigerated trailers. I slowed down as I passed them. Each cab was empty, but through the windows I could see the interiors, and they were identical to mine. Same wear pattern on the driver's seat, same crack in the windshield upper right corner, same air freshener hanging from the CB mic. They were my truck, all 3 of them. Somehow I was driving past 3 versions of my own truck, parked on the shoulder, waiting for something, or nothing, or me. The empty Peterbilt behind me slowed when I slowed, matching my speed perfectly. I thought about stopping, getting out and checking the trucks, looking for clues or evidence or something that would explain what was happening. But I knew what I'd find. Empty cabs, identical interiors, maybe more receipts.
The blue sign appeared. Rest area, 1 mile. I took the exit. The parking lot was different this time. Not empty, not full of ghost trucks. There was just one vehicle, a pickup truck, fairly new, with someone sitting in the cab. I pulled up next to it and shut down my engine, left the headlights on so I could see. The person in the pickup was a woman, maybe 50 years old, wearing a heavy winter coat. She looked over at me through her window, and her expression was tired but alert. Real. Human. I got out and walked over to her truck. She rolled down the window a few inches. "You're stuck too?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "How long have you been here?" "I don't know anymore. My phone says it's been 3 days, but it feels longer. The highway keeps looping. I've been trying to get to Fairbanks, but I can't seem to reach it." "I made it to Fairbanks," I said, "or I thought I did, but then on the way back, the loop started again." She nodded like this made perfect sense. "It shows you things, shows you what you want to see. I reached Fairbanks twice already, talked to my daughter on the phone even. But when I got back on the highway to go home, the marker started repeating. You can't trust anything here. The highway lies." "How do we get out?" "I don't think we do," she said. "I think this is where we stay. I've seen other drivers, other vehicles. None of them are getting out either. We're all just here." "There has to be a way," I said. People don't just disappear onto a highway and never come back, don't they? She gestured at the empty darkness beyond the parking lot. How many drivers go missing every year? How many trucks are never found? How many people disappear on long routes and everyone assumes it was an accident or a mechanical failure? But maybe they just drove into something like this and never found their way out. I thought about the missing persons flyer with my name on it. 2 weeks I'd been gone from the real world. How long before they stopped searching? How long before I was just another statistic, another missing driver, another unsolved case? "What's your name?" I asked. "Karen," she said. "Karen Mitchell. I drive for Linden Transport. Been driving for 23 years. Never saw anything like this." "Marcus Webb, 17 years. Same." We sat in silence for a moment. 2 drivers, trapped in an impossible situation, sharing the exhausted camaraderie of the stuck. "I'm going to keep trying," I said finally. "Keep driving, keep looking for a way out. Giving up means I'll be here forever, and I can't accept that. I gave up yesterday, or what I think was yesterday. I've been sitting in this rest area, waiting to see if the highway will let me go if I just stop playing its game. So far, nothing's changed. I'm still here. Maybe we need to leave together. Maybe it's harder for the highway to hold multiple people." She considered this. Maybe, or maybe we'll just be stuck together instead of stuck alone. Worth trying. She started her truck. I went back to mine and started it too. We pulled out of the rest area one after the other, Karen in the lead in her pickup, me following in my semi. The empty Peterbilt pulled out after us, always there, always following. At 2:17 a.m., we passed mile marker 235. Karen's truck stayed ahead of me, visible in my headlights, moving steadily north. At 2:28 a.m., we passed marker 230, going backward. The numbers were counting down again. I tried the CB. "Karen, you seeing this? The markers are going the wrong way." "Yeah, I see it. Same thing that's been happening. We can't get past this section." At 2:45 a.m., we passed marker 212. The dent was still there. At 3:03 a.m., Karen's truck started to fade. Not suddenly, but gradually, like a photograph left in the sun. The truck became less solid, less real, more like a projection or a ghost. I could see through it to the highway beyond. "Karen," I called on the CB. "Karen, something's happening to your truck." No answer, just static. The truck ahead became more and more transparent until it was just a suggestion of a vehicle, headlights and taillights floating in the air with nothing between them. And then it was gone completely, vanished into the snow, leaving me alone on the highway again. The Peterbilt was still behind me, solid and real, and always there. I drove on, past mile marker 212 again, past the same rest areas and the same signs, and the same eternal snow. Karen was gone, either absorbed by the highway or returned to wherever she'd started from, or dissolved into nothing. I didn't know. Didn't know if she'd ever been real, or if she'd been another illusion, another thing the highway had shown me to keep me engaged, keep me driving, keep me from giving up entirely. At 4:15 a.m., I saw myself walking along the shoulder. Not standing still this time. Walking, same direction I was driving, heading north, trudging through the snow in heavy boots and a winter coat. I slowed as I approached, and the figure, me, another version of me, turned to look at the truck. His face was haggard, exhausted beyond anything I'd ever seen, eyes hollow, beard longer than mine, streaked with more gray. He looked like he'd been walking for weeks. Maybe he had. As I passed, he raised a hand, not waving, just acknowledging, and then he turned back to face north and kept walking, one step at a time, heading towards a destination he'd never reach. I wondered how many of me were out here, how many versions, how many loops, how many Marcus Webbs all trapped on the same highway at different points, different times, different stages of realization and despair.
At 5:30 a.m., dawn should have been starting, but it stayed dark. The sun didn't rise. It never rose here. This was a place of permanent night, eternal winter,
endless storm. At 6:12 a.m., I passed a truck stop I'd never seen before. Big place. Looked like it could handle 50 trucks easily. The lights were on, and through the windows I could see people inside. Actual people, moving around, going about their business. I took the exit and pulled into the parking lot. There were dozens of trucks here, all different models, all with their lights on, all running. But unlike the previous truck stops, these didn't feel empty. There was life here, activity, a sense of occupation. I parked and walked to the entrance. The warmth hit me as I pushed through the doors, and the noise, conversation, the clink of dishes, the hiss of the coffee maker, was almost overwhelming after so long in silence. The place was full of drivers, 20, 30 of them scattered around the restaurant and the store area, all wearing heavy winter gear, all looking tired but alert, all real, solid, present. I walked up to the counter where a waitress was pouring coffee. She looked up at me and smiled. "Coffee, hun?" "Please," I managed. She poured a cup and slid it across to me. I wrapped my hands around it, feeling the warmth, the solidity of the ceramic mug. Real coffee in a real cup in a real truck stop. "First time here?" the waitress asked. "Yeah. How long have you been here?" "Oh, I don't work here full time," she said. "Just passing through like everyone else, helping out while I wait." "Wait for what?" She smiled, and there was something sad in it. For whatever comes next, or it doesn't come, we're all waiting. I looked around at the other drivers. They were eating, drinking coffee, talking in low voices, but now that I looked closer, I could see it. The same exhausted patience in all their faces, the same resignation. They weren't here temporarily. They were here indefinitely. "This is another loop, isn't it?" I said. "Another layer." "Everything's a loop here," the waitress said. "But at least in this one we have coffee and company. That's better than driving alone, don't you think?" I looked at her more closely. She was wearing a name tag that said Sarah, my wife's name, or what I thought was my wife's name. I was having trouble remembering now. "Are you real?" I asked. "Are you?" she countered. I didn't have an answer for that. I took my coffee and sat at a table near the window where I could see my truck. A man at the next table nodded to me. "Just get here?" "Yeah, been driving for, I don't know, days, weeks." "Same as all of us," he said. "I've been on this route for 3 years, or what feels like 3 years. Hard to tell. Time doesn't work right here." 3 years? The words felt hollow in my mouth. "You've been stuck here for 3 years?" "Give or take. Met some folks who've been here longer. One guy claims he's been driving since the 90s. Can't tell if he's telling the truth or if he's just forgotten what year he actually arrived. After a while, it all blends together." "But someone must have noticed you were missing, your family, your company." He shrugged. "Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Maybe I'm missing in the real world and here at the same time. Maybe there's a version of me that made it home, going about his life, while this version is stuck here forever. I've stopped trying to figure it out. Easier to just accept it." I sat there drinking my coffee. It was good coffee, rich and hot and real, and watched the other drivers. They seemed comfortable here, settled, like they'd made peace with being trapped. And part of me understood the appeal. If you couldn't get out, if you were stuck in an endless loop, at least here you had community, had warmth and food and people to talk to. It was a gentler prison than the highway itself, but it was still a prison. At 5:30 a.m., I left the truck stop and got back on the highway. The empty Peterbilt was still in the parking lot, waiting. When I pulled out, it followed. Some of the drivers at the truck stop tried to convince me to stay, said there was no point in keeping going, that I'd just end up back there eventually anyway. But I couldn't stay, couldn't give up and settle into a false comfort while the real world moved on without me. At 7:04 a.m., I passed mile marker 212 again, still counting the loops, even though I'd lost track of the number long ago. At 8:47 a.m., the highway split into 3 paths, left, right, and center. No signs indicating which was which, just 3 roads diverging, all heading north, all disappearing into the snow. I chose center, drove straight ahead where before there hadn't been a road at all, forcing my way through unmarked territory. The ground bounced over rough ground, and the snow got deeper, and the visibility dropped to almost nothing, but I kept going, pushing forward, refusing to accept the binary choices the highway kept offering. And then the ground smoothed out,
and I was back on pavement, and up ahead I saw a mile marker, number 213. I was past 212. I was actually past it, moving forward again, advancing up the highway. Whatever I'd done, choosing a path that wasn't offered, refusing to accept the limitations, it had worked.
Markers 214, 215, 216 came and went. I was making real progress now, actually getting somewhere, even if I didn't know where. At 9:23 a.m., I passed a sign that said Fairbanks, 45 miles. Not 78, not 120, 45 miles, a distance that was actually decreasing as I drove. At 10:15 a.m., the sun rose. Not full dawn, not the bright morning light I was used to, but the sky lightened from black to deep gray, and on the horizon I could see a glow of pink and orange where the sun was climbing. Real sunrise, real day beginning. I felt tears on my face and realized I was crying. The sun was rising. Time was moving forward. I was getting out. At 10:47 a.m., I passed mile marker 340, still heading north, still making progress. Fairbanks was getting closer. I could see more traffic now. Real cars, real trucks, all heading in normal directions at normal speeds. At 11:15 a.m., I saw the Fairbanks city limits sign. I was almost there, almost free. And then my phone rang. Janet. I answered it. Marcus? Where are you? I'm just outside Fairbanks. I'm almost there. Fairbanks? Marcus, you're supposed to be in Anchorage. You were supposed to return the load this morning. Where have you been? I looked at the dashboard clock. It said February 24th, but Janet was saying I should be in Anchorage, which meant Fairbanks hadn't happened yet, or had already happened, or was happening in some other timeline that wasn't quite aligned with this one. I don't know where I am, I admitted. I thought I knew, but nothing makes sense anymore. Janet, listen to me. I need you to pull over somewhere safe and wait. I'm sending someone to find you. You need help. I need to finish the route, I said. I need to make the delivery. The delivery was 3 weeks ago, Marcus. 3 weeks. You're not making sense. Just pull over and wait. 3 weeks, not 2 weeks. 3 now. Time was slipping faster, days disappearing while I drove. I hung up the phone, kept driving, past the Fairbanks city limits sign and kept going, into the city, following the route I knew by heart to the distributor. The streets were empty. No cars, no people, no traffic lights, just empty buildings and snow-covered roads and the growing certainty that this wasn't Fairbanks. This was another illusion, another loop, another false escape designed to keep me compliant. I drove through the empty city until I found the distributor. The building was there, looking right, but when I pulled up to the loading dock, I saw that all the bay doors were open and the interior was empty. No equipment, no boxes, no people, just a hollow shell of a building. On the dock, where I was supposed to back up the trailer, someone had spray-painted words in large red letters, "You can't deliver what was never loaded." I sat there in my truck, engine idling, reading those words over and over. What was never loaded, implying that the cargo I'd been hauling, the $80,000 of king crab, the refrigerated load that had to stay at -10 degrees, had never existed in the first place. I got out and walked back to the trailer, opened the doors. Empty. The trailer was completely empty. No boxes, no cargo, no evidence that there had ever been anything inside. Just empty floor space and the refrigeration unit running pointlessly, cooling nothing, maintaining temperature for a load that didn't exist. How long had it been empty? Had I loaded it at all? Had I ever been to Anchorage? Or had I been driving an empty trailer the entire time, chasing a delivery that was never real? I closed the doors and leaned against the trailer, feeling the cold metal through my coat. Nothing was real. Nothing was solid. Everything I thought I knew about this drive, about my route, about my job, all of it was dissolving under scrutiny, revealing emptiness underneath.
At 12:03 p.m., the exact time I'd arrived at Fairbanks in the previous loop, I got back in the truck and started driving south, back towards Anchorage or towards wherever the highway decided I should go. The empty Peterbilt was waiting for me at the city limits. As soon as I left Fairbanks, it was there in my mirrors, falling into position, following me back into the white void of the highway. At 12:47 p.m., I passed mile marker 362, still heading south, numbers counting down, back towards Anchorage, or back towards the loop, or back towards nowhere. At 1:15 p.m., I passed marker 212. At 1:33 p.m., I passed it again. At 2:04 p.m., I realized I'd been driving marker 212 for what felt like hours, but the dashboard clock said only minutes had passed. Time was compressing now, folding in on itself, minutes stretching into hours, or hours compressing into minutes with no consistency. At 2:47 p.m., or 2:48 p.m., or 2:46 p.m., the clock couldn't decide. The CB voice spoke again. My voice, but older, tired. "You're almost at the center now. Can you feel it? The way the loops are getting tighter, the way time is collapsing. You're spiraling inward to the heart of the highway, where all the lost drivers end up eventually." "What's at the center?" I asked. "Understanding and acceptance. You'll see." At 3:33 p.m., I passed mile marker 212 and kept going, but the highway didn't continue forward or backward. It curved, bending right, and I followed the curve around and around in what I realized was a perfect circle. I was driving in literal loops now, no longer pretending to make progress, just circling endlessly around marker 212 like a satellite in decay. At 4:15 p.m., the center of the circle opened up, and I drove into it.
Story 8. The space beyond the circle wasn't highway anymore. I don't know what it was. The pavement was still there under my tires, solid and real, but everything else had changed. The snow was gone. The darkness was gone. I was driving through nothing. Empty space, gray void that stretched in all directions with no horizon, no sky, no ground. Just infinite grayness with a single lane of highway cutting through it. The Peterbilt was still behind me. I could see it in my mirrors, the only other solid thing in this emptiness. I drove for what might have been minutes or hours. Time had no meaning here, until I saw something ahead, a structure. As I got closer, I realized it was a rest area, not like the ones I'd passed before. This one was larger, more permanent, built of concrete and steel instead of wood and siding. I pulled into the parking lot. There were hundreds of trucks here, maybe thousands, all parked in neat rows, all facing the same direction, all silent and still. I found a spot and shut down the engine. The Peterbilt parked next to me. I got out and walked through the rows of trucks, every model you could imagine. Old Peterbilts and Kenworths, modern Freightliners and Volvos, ancient Macs from the 60s and 70s, trucks I didn't even recognize from manufacturers that might not exist anymore. All empty, all waiting. In the center of the parking lot was the rest area building. Unlike the previous ones, this was open, lights on inside, door unlocked. I pushed through and found myself in a massive space, part warehouse, part lounge, part something I didn't have words for. There were drivers here, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They were scattered throughout the space, some sitting at tables, some sleeping on cots that lined the walls, some just standing and staring at nothing, all wearing the same exhausted expression, all waiting. A man approached me. He was old, 70s, maybe 80s, with a long gray beard and eyes that had seen too much. "Welcome to the center," he said. "You made it." "Made it where?" I asked. "To the place where the lost drivers come, the ones who got caught by the highway and couldn't find their way back. We're all here, all of us who chose wrong or chose right at the wrong time or just got unlucky enough to be driving when the highway decided to collect someone." "How many are there?" I asked. He looked around at the crowd. Thousands, probably. Hard to get an exact count.
People drift in and out, sometimes literally. The highway is still out there, still looping, and sometimes it reaches in here and pulls someone back out to drive some more. But eventually, everyone ends up here. This is the end point. There has to be a way out, I said. There has to be an exit. If there is, no one's found it, he said. I've been here since 1987, or that's what I think anyway. Could be longer, could be shorter. Time doesn't work right here, but I've seen a lot of drivers come through, and I've never seen one leave. We're collected. That's what the highway does. It collects drivers and trucks and keeps them. Why? I asked. What's the purpose? He shrugged. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe it's just what happens when you build enough roads, drive enough miles. Eventually, the highways become their own thing, develop their own purpose, start taking instead of giving. Or maybe there's a reason we can't understand. Doesn't really matter either way. We're here, and here is where we stay. I walked through the crowd, looking at faces. Some were young, some old, some looked like they'd been here for days, some for decades. All had the same look in their eyes, the look of people who'd stopped fighting, stopped searching, stopped hoping. I found a corner and sat down, back against the wall, trying to process everything. This was it, the end of the road, literally. This was where all the loops led, all the repetitions, all the false escapes, to this warehouse full of lost drivers, all trapped together in a space between spaces, outside of time and geography, collected by a highway that had somehow become a trap. A woman sat down next to me. She was younger than me, maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. "How long ago did you arrive?" she asked. "Just now," I said. "You?" "3 days ago, I think. Hard to tell. I was driving from Prudhoe Bay to Valdez. Storm caught me, started looping, eventually ended up here." She paused. "You get used to it, the waiting. It's not as bad as the driving was. At least here you can rest." "I don't want to rest," I said. "I want to get out." We all wanted that at first, but after a while you realize there's no out. There's just here, and here isn't terrible. You're not alone. You're not driving in circles. You're just waiting. For what? I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe eventually we fade away completely, become part of the highway ourselves. Maybe we're already ghosts, and this is what haunting looks like. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd seen, standing on shoulders, sitting in rest areas, driving other trucks. Were they ghosts? Was I? Had I died at some point during the first loop and not realized it, and this was my afterlife? An eternal highway, eternal winter, eternal drive towards nothing?
My phone buzzed. A text message. From Sarah, my wife, whose face I could barely remember now. "Where are you? It's been a month. Please call me. I need to know you're okay." A month. Not 3 weeks. A month now. Time accelerating, or my experience of time decelerating. Days passing in the real world while I experienced hours here. I tried to call her. The phone said it was connecting, but no sound came through, just like before. I texted back. "I'm trapped. Highway won't let me leave. Tell Janet I tried to make the delivery. Tell her I'm sorry." The message showed as sent, but I knew she'd never receive it. The highway didn't allow communication out, only in. It could show me messages to remind me what I'd lost, but it wouldn't let me respond, wouldn't let me reach back to the world I'd left behind. I stood up. "I'm not staying here. I'm going to keep trying." The woman looked up at me with sympathy. "There's nothing to try. The highway's outside. If you go back out there, you'll just loop until you end up here again. Everyone does eventually." "Then I'll loop," I said. "Better than giving up." I walked back through the crowd of drivers, past the ones who'd been here for decades, past the ones who'd stopped even pretending to look for an exit. Back outside to the parking lot full of trucks. The Peterbilt was still parked next to mine. I walked over to it and tried the door. This time, it opened. The cab was identical to mine. Same seat, same controls, same everything. But on the dashboard was a note, written in handwriting I recognized as my own. You'll drive it eventually. Everyone does. You'll realize you're not just following yourself, you are yourself, in all the different loops, all the different times. There's only ever been one truck, one driver, one endless route. You're the thing that's following you. I backed away from the Peterbilt and went to my own truck, started the engine, put it in gear, drove back out into the gray void, back onto the single lane of highway that led away from the center. At some indeterminate time, the clock had stopped entirely now. I passed marker 212 again, or still, or always. The gray void gave way to snow and darkness, the familiar pattern of the loop. I was back in the cycle, driving north or south or in circles, passing the same markers, seeing the same signs. But something was different now. I could feel it. I was closer to something, to understanding maybe, to the truth that the highway wanted me to see. At another indeterminate time, I saw headlights ahead, a truck coming toward me. I prepared for it to be another version of myself, another mirror, another echo. But as it got closer, I realized it was different. Older truck, different model, and when it passed, I caught a glimpse of the driver. He was me, but impossibly old, ancient, 100 years old maybe, more. Gray beard down to his chest, face lined like a topographic map, eyes that had seen everything and remembered nothing. The truck passed and disappeared into the snow behind me. That was my future. That's what I'd become if I stayed on this highway long enough. Not dead, not gone, just old, impossibly old, still driving, still trapped, all memory of the outside world eroded away by time and repetition. I pulled over and sat on the shoulder with the engine idling. The Peterbilt pulled over behind me. I couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep driving in loops, couldn't keep arriving at false destinations, couldn't keep aging on a highway outside of time while the real world moved on without me. There had to be something I wasn't seeing, some choice I hadn't made, some understanding I was missing. The CB crackled. My voice, but the older version, the ancient one I'd just seen. You're asking the wrong question. You keep asking how to get out, but that's not the question. The question is, did you ever really enter, or have you always been here? I remember starting the drive, I said into the mic. I remember leaving Anchorage. Do you, really? Or do you remember remembering it? How much of your past is real memory, and how much is just a story you tell yourself to make sense of where you are? I thought about my wife, Sarah. I remembered her name now, but did I remember her? Could I picture her face, her voice, any specific moment we'd shared? The memories were there, but they were vague, generic, like watching a movie about someone else's life instead of remembering my own. Wife, house, job, years of driving, all of it felt like facts I'd been told instead of experiences I'd lived. What are you saying? That I'm not real? That this is all I've ever been? I'm saying maybe the highway doesn't trap drivers. Maybe the highway is drivers. Maybe we're not people who got caught. Maybe we're the thing that does the catching. Thoughts given form. The idea of endless driving made manifest. We exist because the highway needs drivers, and the highway exists because we need something to drive. We create each other. That doesn't make sense. Nothing here makes sense. That's the point. We're beyond sense, beyond logic. We're in the place where roads dream about themselves. The connection broke. I sat there on the shoulder, snow falling around me, trying to decide what to do. Keep driving or stop. Fight or surrender. Hold on to my memories of the outside world or let them fade and accept that this highway was all there was, all there had ever been. The Peterbilt behind me flashed its lights. Once,
twice, 3 times. I looked in the mirror. The cab wasn't empty anymore. There was someone in the driver's seat. Me, but different. This version looked peaceful, content, like they'd figured something out that I hadn't. They flashed the lights again, then pulled around me and took the lead position, started driving north, slowly, waiting for me to follow. I put my truck in gear and followed. What else was I going to do? We drove together, me following the other me, past mile marker 212 and beyond. The snow started to thin. The darkness started to lift. Up ahead I could see something that looked like dawn. Real dawn, with color and light, and the promise of a new day. The Peterbilt pulled over at a rest area. I pulled over behind it. I got out and walked to the driver's door. The other me, the peaceful one, climbed down from the cab. We stood facing each other in the cold dawn light. He looked exactly like me. Same age, same clothes, same everything. But his eyes were different, calmer, like he'd stopped fighting and found something better than resistance.
"You ready?" he asked. "Ready for what?" To stop asking questions, to stop trying to understand, to just drive and let that be enough. "I can't do that," I said. "I need to get home. I have a wife, a life." He smiled sadly. "Do you? Or do you have memories of those things, getting fainter every day? How long until they're gone completely and all you have is the road?" "They're real," I insisted. "My life was real." "Maybe," he said, "but it's not here, and you are. You have to choose. Keep fighting to get back to something that might not exist anymore, or accept where you are and find peace in the driving. Those aren't the only options. They're the only ones that matter." He climbed back into the Peterbilt. "I'll be ahead of you. When you're ready to stop fighting, follow me all the way. We'll reach the end together." "What's at the end?" "Nothing," he said. "Everything. Does it matter?" He drove away, north, toward the dawning light. I stood there in the rest area, watching him go, trying to decide if he was right. Maybe peace was better than struggle. Maybe acceptance was better than hope. But I wasn't ready yet. I wasn't ready to give up. I got back in my truck and drove north, following the Peterbilt at a distance. The dawn grew brighter. The snow stopped completely. The highway stretched ahead, clear and straight, looking almost normal. At 6:47 a.m., the clock was working again. I passed a sign that said, "Welcome to Alaska." I was entering Alaska, but I'd been in Alaska the whole time, unless I'd somehow driven out of it without noticing and was coming back, or unless the signs meant something else here, marking psychological boundaries instead of geographic ones. At 7:15 a.m., I passed marker 187, where I'd started so long ago, or where I thought I'd started. At 7:52 a.m., I saw Anchorage ahead, the city rising out of the landscape, buildings and lights and civilization, real and solid and there. I followed the Peterbilt down the exit ramp, into the city streets, through the morning traffic. Other cars and trucks moved around us, normal people going about normal days. I was back. I was actually back in the real world. The Peterbilt led me to a loading dock, the place where I'd picked up the cargo back at the beginning, where I thought I'd picked it up. We both pulled into spots and shut down our engines. The other me, the peaceful me, climbed down from his cab and walked over. "You made it back. You escaped." "Did I? Or is this another loop?" "Does it matter?" he asked again. "You're here. You can get out of the truck. You can call your wife. You can go home. Maybe that's real, maybe it's not, but it's better than driving in circles, isn't it?" He walked away, into the building, disappearing into the crowd of workers. I stood next to my truck, looking up at the morning sky. It was blue, real blue, not the gray void or the endless night of the highway. Birds were flying, clouds were moving, everything looked normal. My phone had signal. I called Sarah. She answered on the second ring. "Marcus? Marcus!
Oh my God, where have you been? I got lost on the highway, but I'm back now. I'm in Anchorage. You've been gone for 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Marcus. The police have been searching. Everyone thought you were dead. 6 weeks, not a month, not 3 weeks. 6 weeks had passed while I was driving through loops that felt like days. I'm okay, I said. I'm coming home. Please do. Please. I've been so worried. I will. I promise. I hung up and stood there in the parking lot, feeling the sun on my face, trying to convince myself this was real, that I'd actually escaped, that the highway had let me go. But in the back of my mind, I could still hear the engine rumble, could still feel the steering wheel under my hands, could still see mile marker 212 approaching in my headlights, and I knew with absolute certainty that I'd be back on that highway soon. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe next month, but eventually I'd get in a truck and start driving, and the loops would begin again, and I'd be back where I'd been, lost on an impossible highway, driving toward a destination that didn't exist. Because once the highway has you, it never really lets go. It just gives you breaks, little moments of normal life to make you think you're free. But you're not free. You're never free. You're just waiting for the next drive. Epilogue: The Return. 3 months later, I took another job. I told myself I wouldn't. I told Sarah I was done with long haul, done with the highways, done with Alaska. I'd find work local, deliveries in town, nothing that took me more than 50 miles from home. But the money wasn't as good, and the work wasn't as satisfying. And every day I'd see trucks on the highway heading north or south or east or west, and I'd feel something pulling at me, the call of the road, the need to drive. In July, I accepted a load from Seattle to Fairbanks, standard route, good money. Sarah didn't want me to go, but we needed the income. I promised I'd be careful, promised I'd check in every few hours, promised I'd come back. I left Seattle on July 15th at 3 p.m., made good time through Washington and British Columbia, crossed into Alaska around July 16th around noon. Everything normal, everything fine. At 2:47 p.m. on July 16th, I passed mile marker 187 on the Parks Highway. At 3:52 p.m., I passed mile marker 212, and I knew, even before the snow started, even before the darkness fell, even before the loops began, I knew the highway had been waiting for me to come back, waiting for me to choose to drive again. The mile markers started repeating, the GPS started glitching, the CB filled with static and voices, and in my mirror I saw the Peterbilt, empty cab, tall exhaust stacks, 30 yards back, always 30 yards back. I'm writing this on July 23rd, or what the dashboard clock says is July 23rd. I've been driving for 7 days, or 7 hours, or 7 weeks. Time doesn't work right here. It never did. I've passed mile marker 212 more times than I can count. I've seen myself standing on the shoulder, walking in the snow, driving other trucks. I've stopped at rest areas full of empty trucks and truck stops full of trapped drivers. I've seen the center, that gray void with its warehouse full of lost souls. And I know I'm not getting out this time. I had my chance. I had 3 months of normal life, 3 months of freedom, and I chose to come back. I chose to drive, and the highway doesn't give third chances. So I'm driving, still driving, past mile marker 212, toward Fairbanks or away from it or around it in circles. The Peterbilt follows, the snow falls, the night never ends. And somewhere behind me, or ahead of me, or in some other loop entirely, another driver is just entering the storm, just starting to notice the mile markers repeating, just beginning to realize something is wrong. And they'll drive like I drove. They'll fight like I fought. They'll reach the center like I reached the center. And eventually, they'll escape like I escaped. And then they'll come back like I came back. Because that's what the highway does. It lets you think you're free. It gives you hope, and then it takes you back. The endless mile. We're all driving it. Those of us who've been caught,
who've seen the loops, who've passed mile marker 212 enough times to lose count. We're all still out here, still driving, still hoping, still trapped. So if you are driving late at night and you see a truck that doesn't quite look right, or if your mile markers start repeating, or if the highway starts to feel too empty, too quiet, too wrong, turn around, get off at the next exit, stop driving, and wait for dawn. Don't do what I did. Don't keep going. Don't trust the GPS when it says you're almost there, because you're not almost there. You'll never be there. There is no there. There's only the highway, endless and white with snow, and mile marker 212 appearing in your headlights again and again and again. The Peterbilt is still behind me, 30 yards, back, always there. And I'm still driving, past mile marker 212, into the endless mile, forever. This recording was found on a dashboard camera recovered from an abandoned Freightliner Cascadia at a rest area on the Parks Highway in Alaska. The truck's refrigeration unit was still running, but the trailer was empty. The driver, Marcus Webb, was reported missing on February 9, 2023. He has not been found. The GPS logs show the truck traveled from Anchorage to Fairbanks repeatedly between February 9 and July 23, 2023. Though no refueling records exist for this period. The odometer showed an impossible 47,000 additional miles. The dashboard camera was set to audio-only mode. This is the transcript of what was recorded. If you have any information about Marcus Webb's whereabouts, please contact the Alaska State Troopers. But if you're driving late at night and you see mile marker 212 with a dent in the number, keep going, don't stop, and whatever you do, don't look in your mirrors.